Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining Greatest Access Tutorial Ever. I'm your host, Jeremy. Thanks so much for everyone tuning in. This is episode 8.1 where we're talking about bound and unbound objects and control sources. I want to remind you guys, if you haven't yet subscribed and you find this content useful, please consider subscribing. Like the video, ring the bell for notifications. There'll be a lot more. Thank you so much for everyone who does comment and like and subscribe. It actually really does motivate me. So if you've ever done a YouTube channel, you know how important that is. So thank you. So we are on episode 8.1. We're still in the beginner course, basically. This is kind of like the main quest line if you're brand new to Access and you want to learn from this channel. This is also in the playlist for the channel. So if you go into the playlist called the main quest line, this is it. Now, before we get in here, I would highly recommend, reviewing episodes 1.2 and 6.1 if you haven't already. With that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, just to orient you guys really quick, in case you don't know, we have several tables in our sample database that we're creating. One is called table car makes. Now, I call this a baseline table, and that's just my lingo. What that means is it has no foreign keys. It's just a baseline table. This is auto number, primary key, the car make. Pretty simple. Then I have a table car models. This is auto number, primary key, the car model, and then a foreign key to the table car make ID. Now, I used the lookup wizard when I made this table, which means it doesn't show you the ID, it shows you the name of the make. And then I have a table inventory, which is kind of combining all kinds of stuff here. It has foreign keys back to the model and the color. We'll get to that later. So now, what are bound and unbound, and what does that even mean? So I have this form that I made called form car models. Now this form has a record source of table car models. So if I look at the properties here, table car models is the record source. And I'm sorry that that's small. I don't think I can increase that font size. Maybe. So what this means is this form is talking directly to a record source, which happens to be a raw table. And what I did was I can go through all 7 records that we have in this table. I have the model ID, the model name, and then the vehicle make, which is a foreign key. And if I compare that to the actual table, table car models, I have an ID, car model name, and the vehicle make, which is foreign key. Pretty simple. So, what's so confusing about this? Well, not really confusing, but what you have to realize is this value in this field is not Honda. This value is something else. This is kind of like, I don't know. Think of it as kind of like maybe somebody, one of your coworkers that is two-faced. They show you one thing, but they really mean another. Well, that's what a combo box can be. So, what do I mean by that? If I enable this field, now both of these fields are bound to FK make ID. So if I go into this form, I have bound both of these fields to make FK make ID, which is in this table, table car models, FK make ID. So if they're both bound and I start looking through them, the question is, why does this say Honda and this say 3? Why does this say Ford and this say 2? Honda 3 again, Mazda is 5, right? That is because, again, they are showing you one thing, but really representing another. Now, how do we do that? So the only thing that can do this, I believe, is combo box and a list box, which I'll show you next. So a combo box, here is what it looks like for the data source. So I'm going to take a picture of this and kind of zoom in. That way you guys can see. So what I did on this guy was, as you can see, that combo box control source is tied to that FK make ID field from that table. However, the row source, or what I'm going to show the user, is a little different. It's a little more complex. It's actually selecting 2 different fields from table car makes. It's selecting ID and it's selecting car make, and then ordering by car make to make it alphabetical ordering. And you'll notice it's bound to column 1, so it's bound to this ID. So wait a minute, if it's bound to this ID, why is it showing the car make and not the ID? Well, glad you asked. That's because if you go to the Format tab for the properties for this combo box, let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can see. Okay, let's zoom in. You'll see that it has 2 columns for the combo box, but the first column width is 0. So here's what's happening. The row source for this combo box. I said, hey, select ID and then also select car make. So I want you, I'm getting 2 columns worth of data. I'm going to make the first column 0. That is not the same as no column. It's just 0, 0 width, and then the other column has a width of 1 inch, whatever your unit is in your country. Now the text box, if we look at the text box, again, it's also bound to fkMakeID, but it can't pull that kind of trick. It just shows you raw data. Therefore, when you're looking at this field, this form, the foreign key here is like, hey, I'm showing you Honda, but I've really got this other column over here hidden that you can't see. That means 3. And that's what I really care about as a database, right? It shows Chevy, but it really means, I think, 1. And to verify that, what we can do is we can go to this guy here. I'm going to modify the format, and I'm going to make the second column, the first column 1 inch wide, along with the second. Now then, here's what happens. It is selecting, I told it, hey, your row source is 2 columns, ID, make name. You are bound to this first column. Therefore, and since the first column is non-zero, now it's showing me, it can only show 1 column after I've selected a value. It doesn't keep showing me multiple columns. Unfortunately, that's just how it works for a combo box. But it's showing me now the ID. Now, most people don't want to see that, right? End user doesn't need to see that. That's going to confuse them unless they're the database designer. So we're going to make that first column back to 0. Now we're still bound to the first column, but it is now 0 width. And now I have Ford, Chevy, Honda, etc. Makes sense. Now, you can do some interesting things. So these are all bound, which means if I change this, it's going to change the make of the Model 6 to whatever I choose. So I could do something weird like, oh, a Chevrolet 6, which doesn't exist. Let's go back to Honda. Now I'm also able to put unbound fields on this form, even though this form is bound. So you'll notice I have another combo box, and it has the same thing this guy has. The only difference between this combo box and this one is bound to fkMakeID, this one is bound to absolutely nothing, which means if I can set this to Hyundai, I can set this to Toyota, it matters not because it's not bound to any data in this table. It doesn't matter. Now, you may ask, what is the point in that? Well, unbound items can be very useful depending on what you're doing. So let me show you an example. You might not actually do this. This probably isn't the most efficient way, but oh no. Well, that's definitely not the efficient way when I don't show you the entire technical difficulties. Okay. Oh, what the hell? One moment, please. Okay, we're back. Sorry for that. So I had actually previously, before I started this recording, modified some of my tables. And when I did that, it broke one of these things. So anyway, this is an unbound text box with a little bit of code behind it, which shows me something cool. It shows me the number of models I currently have in my inventory, which was another table, unbound, which means no matter what this is, this has nothing to do with table car models, but I'm using it as like a little data point in my form. Now you can do all kinds of crazy stuff like that. This is just one example. Now, remember before when I said, even if we make this display both columns, after you select it, it's only going to show that first column. It's only going to show that number. Well, there's another control in Access which works a little differently, and maybe that'll be better for you, especially if you don't have a lot to select. So this one here, now this is an unbound form, which means it is not tied to anything. It's just kind of a blank canvas. I put a list box in there. Now this list box actually has 3 columns. So this list box is tied to table car models, which was kind of like our previous form. But you'll note here that this has the ID, the Accord, but notice this, the actual value of this list is different. Why is this 5 but this says 6? Remember, this is a foreign key to the car make. The car model ID is what this is tied to. How did I do that? So if we select that list and we expand this and then we take a picture so we can zoom in, it's very similar to a combo box, but also different. Oh, in this one, I'm selecting 3 fields, my row source. Notice my control source is blank. That list is not tied to anything. My row source is select ID, car model, and fkMakeID from car models order by car model. Very similar to the drop-down box before, except this is getting 3 fields, not just 2. Now, it's bound to column 1, which is the ID, and I did the same exact trick that I did in the combo box, which is I messed with the column sizes so that it hides the first column. So it's bound to column 1, which is ID, 0 width is that column, then I show the other 2. Well, that ends up looking like this. The ID column over here for the model is hidden, but its value is 3. This row's value is 5 because it's bound to that first column. Now this one, you'll notice, is showing you the actual number for the car make instead of that hocus pocus. That's because I'm using a raw table feed, and this doesn't have the ability to hide that. Now you could do that with another type of query. Maybe we'll get into that later. Not this episode, but this is how a list box works. And again, this list box is pulling directly from this table. But instead of showing you Honda, it's showing you 3. Pretty neat. So the idea behind all of this is that for combo boxes and list boxes, they can show one thing but be bound to another thing. Now this becomes very, very, very important when your database gets way more complex. You really need to understand what's going on with your tables. Now, if you are brand new to Access and you don't know how to, maybe you get lost or you're designing these tables and you don't exactly know what you've done, you can go to Database Tools and you can go to Relationships, and let's open the ribbon, and you want to hit All Relationships just in case. Now, this is kind of your relationship kind of designer thing, and anytime you make foreign keys with lookups when you're designing your tables, an automatic relationship bind happens, right? Now, sometimes your tables will like this. Here's a trick you can do. Let's say this is really ugly and it's over here. It's normally not nearly as neat as when I do it. If you double click this, it auto-sizes your table representation. Makes it nice and tidy, and there you go. Now, let me zoom this in, just in case you guys can't see on your viewing device. Let's zoom in a little bit. I really wish it wouldn't resize when I do that. Okay. So remember, I believe it was episode 1.2, we talked about one-to-manys and all that crazy stuff. So here's how you would read this. There is only one car make, one unique car make. For every one car make, there may be many models for under that car make. So for every Ford, there's only one Ford, but there could be lots of Ford models. Likewise, for every Ford, let's say Mustang, you may have many of those Mustangs in your inventory. Again, one to many. And then since this is a little bit different, you have lots of cars in your inventory, but they only get to pick one color ID. Now, that's not counting like multicolors and all this crazy stuff. So that's a many-to-one relationship. But basically, when we're filling out our inventory of cars, which we'll do in the future, you have to pick a color. There's only one color per color name, I guess. But lots of cars in the inventory could have that same color. So that's how that works. That's how you would read that. So as you're building your tables and you're creating your relationships between your tables, something to keep in mind. Again, once you're a little more advanced in database, I don't really use that very often. So that's it. That is Unbound stuff. We will get more into it later. You can start doing some neato things, but just remember, anytime you see a drop-down box that has a value in it, like Honda, remember that as a designer, you have to realize the value you're talking about may be hidden. It may actually be Honda if that's their primary key. I wouldn't suggest that. I would suggest using an auto number. But if your primary key is like an auto number, then you should be binding to that ID, because here's what happens. So let's say I'm going in here and I'm going to edit this. And now this, oh gosh darn it, I didn't save it. Whatever, screw it. We'll do it later. Yes, only the highest quality training here at Gate. All right, so yeah, well, it's late. It's like 9 o'clock at night where I am. So anyway, I really appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, shoot a comment or maybe an email. I don't even know if YouTube lets you email. It's got some kind of weird user ID now. Thanks so much. Again, if you haven't subscribed and you find this useful, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications, because I publish pretty often. Have a great day.